Many people won't read between the lines here, but what he's talking about is a bailout. Most people, I believe, will gravitate towards voting for him because you are faced with an even worse choice when you look at Trudeau and what he's done. But I wouldn't be too optimistic about what Pierre is going to do in the future. I'm sorry to say that we have another lying politician on our hands, and no, I'm not talking about the dictator and authoritarian leader Justin Trudeau. Pierre recently just came out on a live stream and he basically said that he was calling on the government to decrease inflation, decrease interest rates, which sounds fantastic, doesn't it?
Bring down interest rates and inflation by balancing the budget. A year ago, Mr. Trudeau had promised a balanced budget by the year 2028. We have $900 billion of mortgages set to renew into these higher rates over the next 3 years. We have an emergency on our hands to bring rates down before those mortgages renew.
Apart from the two are the complete opposite of each other in terms of the Bank of Canada's definition of monetary policy. Once again, we are just seeing a politician who is literally politicizing the Bank of Canada and politicizing monetary policy that is so-called independent in Canada. Of course, we are about to have a mortgage renewal crisis in Canada, and Pierre was not wrong when he said that $900 billion worth of mortgages are set to renew in the coming years. The problem is, he's not actually talking about how they got there, how we got to these insanely high mortgage payments, and how we got to these insanely high home prices, because that is really the question at hand here. And when you go back through monetary policy history, you find out that when he was finance minister in government, guess what? Interest rates were held very low, and this helped propel the housing market to new heights. And right before the election in 2015, they decreased interest rates again. If a politician is prepared to politicize monetary policy, then we have to look at monetary policy in terms of politics. So we have to go back and look at when he was in government, when he was finance minister, and say, hold on a second. So now you're saying bring down interest rates because it's hurting homeowners. You're also saying bring down inflation, which kind of doesn't make sense. You're blaming everything on the Trudeau government, and 90% of that is well deserved for the Trudeau government. That is not the only driver behind inflation that we have seen. There is a massive amount of things that impact the inflation numbers, and the inflation numbers that we see, as we've discussed on this channel many times, are completely false and completely broken. Pierre constantly harps on about the 2% inflation target, and that is just an utter load of bullshit. The inflation target that we should have in Canada is zero, if anything at all, because we know that the Bank of Canada and the Fed and all these central banks' ability to actually control inflation is not really there. In fact, when you look at the past, they're just more reactive than proactive because they don't have a clue what they're doing. And being destroyed at 2% per year as opposed to 0% per year is still going to destroy you. I mean, do the math. 10 years of 2% inflation, you've lost 20% of purchasing power, and people's wages just aren't going up. What Pierre is trying to describe is just a utopia which will not and does not exist. He is saying that he's going to fix all these different things and get all these things in line. Many of them actually contradict the very things that he talks about. And this isn't a video to harp on about Pierre. I actually still believe he's going to win the next election. He's a populist after all. And most people, I believe, will gravitate towards voting for him because you are faced with an even worse choice when you look at Trudeau and what he's done. But I wouldn't be too optimistic about what Pierre is going to do in the future because it seems like he really doesn't understand what's going on. And it's becoming blatantly obvious that his views have changed over the past couple of years, and he has changed himself massively. And he's done this in order to try and appeal to more and more people who wouldn't necessarily vote conservative. Canada has a massive housing bubble, and that housing bubble was brought on by decades of low interest rates, decades of lax lending standards, allowing homeowners to leverage themselves upon leveraging themselves. I mean, when you go back to 2021, for example, and take a look through who was buying the homes back then when home prices boomed, a lot of people were buying second and third homes back then. And that that's because the odds are stacked far in the favor of people who own compared to those who don't own. And that is because the price of ownership is well out of reach and unaffordable to most Canadians. And what Pierre is essentially suggesting is that we need to bring down those interest rates so all those over-leveraged people can be bailed out. Many people won't read between the lines here, but what he's talking about is a bailout for those homeowners that are over-leveraged, that can't afford the homes that they live in. Why can't they afford the homes that they live in? It's not just a fact of Justin Trudeau, it's a fact of him and the Harper government as well. They have both contributed massively to this housing bubble. And what I put to you is you now have a laughable situation where you've got two parties, both of which contributed to all the problems we have today in Canada. One massively, which is the Trudeau government, and they're going, we're just going to fix everything and everything is going to be fine. And I'm here to tell you no. And it's very disappointing to see how Pierre has changed over the past couple of years. This is why I do not throw my support behind any politician, because I believe every politician will just set you up for disappointment. Even if you look at Danielle Smith, who I thought great leader, she's actually come in, just done more stimulus programs, and she's done wide stimulus programs for everybody when it comes to energy relief and all these different things. It just goes to show that clearly she just doesn't understand the basic economics. And it's just wildly disappointing, to be honest, that this is going on, and it's unfortunate that I've had to bring this to you. Pierre is right that we have a homelessness crisis. He's right that lots of people are going to food banks. He's right that lots of people are struggling. The problem is I can just see the holes in the arguments that he makes from a financial and economic perspective. And the thing is, he's talking about things that just conflict with each other. Like he's saying, oh yeah, let's bring down inflation and interest rates. Think about it. Most of you know on this channel that if the Bank of Canada were to come in tomorrow and drop interest rates down to 2%, then essentially the Canadian dollar would absolutely tank because of the massive interest rate differential. And then you would see goods and services rise drastically in price because of that, in response to that, which would then drive up inflation. So the fact is the two kind of do conflict with each other at certain points, like right now. I mean, even because the Bank of Canada is offering less of an interest rate than the Fed, you've seen the Canadian dollar that has depreciated significantly. And some of the things that you're likely to see increase in price are things like food, and are those core goods that everybody needs, and are those goods that everybody is going to the food bank to go and get. So you can't just say, on the one hand, we're just going to decrease interest rates and we're going to bring down inflation, and we're going to do that all by reducing deficits. It's fantasy. It's pure fantasy. We're also going to decrease taxes. I mean, how on earth do you do that? How do you decrease taxes, and then how do you balance a budget? How do you bring down the deficits? It's just pure fantasy. And yes, you can shrink government, but Pierre has kind of abandoned that. He doesn't so much talk about shrinking government anymore, which was one of the things that I liked about him, that he talked about that. He doesn't really talk about that anymore because so much of the jobs in Canada are public sector related jobs. So therefore he cannot come out and say that we're going to shrink government. And even if he does shrink government and he does follow through on that promise, what's going to happen? That's going to take a significant amount of time. If you're looking for a VPN to get around Trudeau's censorship laws like Bill C-11, go to expressvpn.com/marketmania. But anyway, if you've enjoyed this video, you may like this playlist here. You may also like this video here. Thank you so much for your support, and I will see you on the next one.